started. Thank you for joining today's webinar, How to Handle Data Subject Asset Request. We appreciate you joining us today. The first thing I want to do is take a second to introduce our speakers. My name is Nicole Miller. I work in product marketing here at Gimmal, and I am joined today by our key speaker, Gimmal Solution Architect, Jeff Tujetsch. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping items to go through. If you have any questions throughout this webinar, feel free to submit them in the Q&A section on your screen. We will answer as many as we have time for at the end of this presentation. There will be at least one poll question at the end, so please keep an eye out for that. And as always, if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know and we'll assist you. To kick things off, I have a couple of slides here to tell you a little bit more about Gimmal and how we can help you take control of your information with our suite of solutions. Gimmal is an information governance software company founded in 2002. Our mission is to help you achieve your information governance goals by providing a solution that balances your value of your information as well as the risk it also presents. Whether you are trying to discover information in unstructured data sources, migrate from legacy systems, or comply with policies from across multiple repositories, Gimmal can help you achieve your information goals. We have a client success team and a global network of partners that deliver solutions in conjunction with key partners like Microsoft and SAP. Gimmal's family of software products work together to let you create an efficient digital workplace. Our comprehensive solution includes migration from legacy systems, file analysis and e-discovery, electronic and physical records management, as well as document management for SAP. For those of you who are not new to our webinars, you might have noticed a slight name change in our products on the screen. They are the same solutions, just a more simplified name. And with that short introduction, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Jeff so he can get started with today's presentation.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. Okay, so my name is Jeff Tujetsch, as Nicole said, and I'll be guiding you through the DSAR presentation today. So we have three main bullets that we'll be talking about: the obligations and risks associated with these DSARs, a realistic approach for locating and collecting the information, and how the right tools can help you with three different things: the risk, expediting the process, and especially saving money. Always good. So first off, we're going to start off with the obligations and risks associated with DSARs. Okay, so to lay the foundation, let's make sure we're all on the same page of what a DSAR is. It is a request made by an individual, a consumer, to query a company and say, what personal data do you have of mine within your organization? How do you use that data? And then how do you intend to use that data? So all three of these things are viable questions from the requester that you must provide information about. Okay, so let's talk about DSARs a little bit. So when I say the word DSAR, it's actually referring to the access one here. So there are three types of requests. DSARs, the access one, take up about 27% of the requests that are happening currently. Do not sell, which is going to third-party products or companies, 33% of the requests are for that. And you're going to notice the largest is 40%, and that is growing. In fact, I actually did this a while ago. I was able to request a deletion of my data. Somebody signed me up for a publication, upon which I did not authorize them. And so I contacted the company and they complied and deleted my data. So it is a very viable thing for you to do as a consumer, to be able to do that, as well as realizing that people will be requesting the same of your company. So there are federal laws that are applicable to this. Some of these you're going to recognize, HIPAA especially, the Privacy Act of '74, been around for a while. But why these come into play now is these are starting to work with the privacy laws that are being enacted in different states. So going down to that, you're going to see right now there are 3 states that are active for DSARs. They are California, which was the trailblazer in this. So CCPA with this amendment as well. Colorado and Virginia, which used California as a template, but they made their own tweaks to it to have it be something unique to them. So you probably say, well, then if my state's not listed here, then I don't have to worry about it. Well, that's not true. So don't wait for your state to pass a law. There's a lot of states that are doing this. In fact, more than 2/3 of the states right now are in the process of enacting laws, whether it be bills introduced or they're in committee, whatever state they're in, they're being talked about. So be ready. In addition, federal law is going to happen eventually as well. It could be months or a couple of years away, but now is the time to create and refine your data protection practices. Be ready for when this happens. Here's the US map of the states in green are already enacted. And then the ones in dark blue is obviously the ones that are in process. And right now there's none for these states in light blue, but once again, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be paying attention to this. You might want to be ready and even contact people within your legislature, find out where they are in this process to see how soon something is coming for you. All right, so how's the request made? Well, we have a few choices here. It's a toll-free telephone number, which they must be provided for the consumer to be able to call toll-free, email address, mailing address, and website. And you're going to notice a line above those 4 bullets. If you're an online business, you only have to do an email address. You don't have to do the other 3. Part of the request that you must do is the verification of the request to make sure it's authentic. And what I mean by that is if John Smith is asking for Betty Brown's information, you've got a problem. So we need to make sure that you're authenticating the request. And there's a multitude of ways you'll see here. There's probably just some of them. Any way that you can have the requester prove they are who they say they are. Because the last thing you want to do is to be propagating or contributing to privacy issues because you are not doing that authentication properly. To the left, you're going to see, I just made up a little email for, just as an example, and here's the acme.com company, Wile E. Coyote's favorite company. And in this, you'll see that I said, I want to know about the information that you have in your business about me. And I did not include my own PII, which most likely I would have, because there's 2 different types. When we talk of PII, that's personal identifiable information. That is either indirect PII, such as gender, ethnicity, religion, blood types. Those are things that can identify a group of people, but not an individual. And then there's things such as social security number, credit card, what have you, which we'll be talking about shortly, that does uniquely identify you. So typically on a request, the requester is going to have to be providing that information so that you can verify that you have it. And you can also make sure that you are finding the proper person's information as opposed to somebody else. So CCPA request, I'm going to focus on this a little bit. I found some information on that. You have 45 days to respond and complete a request. So when the requester says, I want to know what you have about me, well, as you see in the 3rd bullet, the clock has started ticking. So this is not upon when you authenticate the request. The authentication is part of that 45 days you have to respond to that. Needless to say, 45 days is not that long. Though you can request an extension, don't depend on it. You need to make sure that you have a process that can take care of these requests within the proper time period, in this case, 45 days. How much does it cost to submit a request? Nothing. The consumer individual doesn't have to pay a thing for this, but you could. If you are not compliant, these might not look like large numbers, maybe a rounding error to some bigger companies. But you start like for CCPA, if it's between 2,500 and 7,500 a violation, there's 40+ million people in California alone. Do the math. You don't want to be non-compliant. You could end up paying some severe fines for this. And as they say, there is no bad PR. Well, I'd have to disagree with this, because if your company is known as a company that's not protecting consumer data, that wouldn't be good for the reputation of the company, obviously. Okay, so now let's talk about the approach for collecting and locating, locating and collecting the information. So here's the steps to process and fulfill a request. Obviously, the requester creates it, you log it. The logging, the audit trail is very important. You need to make sure you have that and that it can be produced at any time. You authenticate, which we already talked about. And then we get into the big one, process the data, discover the data. This is the heavy hitter, the one that's going to consume most of the time, because you need to be able to take a request, go through all of your data that's consumer-based, and be able to provide the results of that. So categorizing the data, this is very useful. We're going to talk about this in a little bit, but also classifying, knowing what data could contain the information about the consumer. Instead of having to search all of your data for these matches, the more you can isolate that consumer data, knowing where to look, the faster the process is going to be, and it's going to be more efficient as well. If you can map the data to the owner, by all means, you can do that, the owner being typically the requester, then that's going to be very helpful too. Review the results. Does it meet the DSAR requirements? Make sure that none of your proprietary or privileged information about your company, maybe formulas, whatever it might be, is not included within the results. Make sure there's no other data about another subject. So once again, if we find a Word document that has Tom Jones information, but also Betty Brown's, let's not give Tom any info about Betty. That's not allowed. And then delivering the results, encrypt it, secure it, and make sure it's timely. So make sure that you're giving this in electronic format to the requester that is properly secured. So when you go back and look at discover the data, I wanted to go through that first, but do you know where all your consumer data is located? That's the big question, because a lot of companies don't. We're going to talk about some of the places where that data could be later and how a little bit scary it is with it out there. And then once again, make sure you're not giving anything away that is not directly and only directly associated with that particular requester. Okay, what data should be searched? All relevant internal data. Once again, do you know what that is? Is it file shares? Is it email? Is it SharePoint? Where's that data? Is it the full set of your file shares? So you knowing all that and having a handle on that prior to needing it is key. This is also what your responsibility is. All data shared with a third party. If you are selling data to a third party, you need to know who they are and what you're selling, because that's incumbent upon you to include that within the request. And then lastly, a time frame. It's not like you can go back and say, give me everything about me from 1973 on. Typically, it's going to be within a time frame like a year, so that you have to produce that data only for that past time frame. All right, so I talked about PII a little bit. Just give you some examples here for those of you not familiar with it. How can the requester say, this is me? Well, these things are pretty common. Credit card number, driver's license, mailing, passport, phone, and social security numbers. Some very viable, uniquely identifying information that can be done. But there's others, and here's another subset of those. So things like you might not have thought about, your license plate, your vehicle identification number, your email address, IP address. All these things can be associated with a person and can help identify that. So once again, these are one of the many ways, or some of the many ways, that a person can be identified. So do you know what your company stores? What part of this data can be used, and what you must find when a search is done to be able to provide a full set of data back to the requester? All right, so the right tools can reduce your risk, make the process run more efficiently and expeditiously, and once again, most importantly, save you money. So let's talk about those. Like anything else automated that we ever use in our life, can this be done manually? Absolutely. Would you want to do it? Probably not, because the manual process is going to be extremely tedious. And as you see here, the risk you have is how long it would take to do it, the inaccuracy possibly of the data, and are you making sure that you're searching everywhere you're supposed to search? So time is of the essence in here. And how much time implicitly and money implicitly are you wasting by trying to do this manually? Because people's time does cost the company money. And this is a statistic I pulled out. Prepare to process 100, 200 requests per 1 million consumer records each year. So if you take a 5-day work week, roughly 260 days a year, you're talking almost, in this case, 2 out of every 3 days, we're going to be processing requests. That's not going to be able to be done manually in a larger company. And keep in mind, this 1 million consumer records is not talking about the number of consumers, the number of records for the consumers. You could have multiple records for the same person. So keep that in mind as well. Then I pulled these numbers out. It gives you the idea of how much does this cost you. $1,400 a day. That's $175 an hour. $10,000 per request. And then this number is staggering. up to and above $250,000 per 1 million consumer records. So doing this, can it be done manually? Yes, but I don't believe the risks are worth it. And even though it does cost money to buy a solution, the amount of money you would spend on the solution is going to be much less than you performing this work over and over and over again. So what should an automated tool offer? Well, you need to have the ability to access your multiple data sources. So what I mean by data sources are types of data. Once again, email, file shares, SharePoint, any place that has consumer data, you need to be able to access all of that within the tool and to access it, more importantly, in parallel with each other. We don't want to be serial in this. We have 45 days to comply. So we want to be able to search these things all at the same time to be able to have this running so that when we're done with one, we're done with all. That's very important to make sure we're paralleling this. The audit trail, once again, you need to be prepared to always have an audit trail available to show what you've done, to show the history of the request and so on. Scalability, this is crucial as well. So in addition to the access to multiple data sources, your solution needs to be scalable. I mean, if you only have, for instance, one server or process, whatever you have, trying to do everything, it's not going to be able to pull it off. So you need to have something, a tool that can be scalable, that can distribute the work across multiple ways of doing it. And that way it'll run obviously and much faster because it's doing it in parallel. These two things are also key. These are very proactive. So these are becoming more and more used, we're seeing in the industry. The ability to classify. So what I mean by that is this is a proactive step. So if we went through, say if somebody has 50 terabytes of file shares, which actually in today's world is pretty small, and every time you do a request, you have to go through all 50 terabytes looking for the data, that's going to be costly. Instead, what I'm recommending on this, with an automated tool, is to be able to classify the data, to be able to go through the data in advance of the request saying, is this PII? Is this credit card? Is this social security number? Be able to apply labels to this data. Now, once you have that done and you're in a perpetual process with all changed and new data, then when it comes time for you to process your request, now you can process a subset of the data instead of the full set because you've already isolated in that low percentage of the PII. And then indexing the data, if you're looking to perform any kind of searching for keywords, what have you, having a data index is going to be crucial as well, because once again, going through that data over and over and over again, looking for values is quite honestly very inefficient. Instead, you want to have that data index so exponentially faster with this. So these two together, the classification and the indexing of data, are really going to help you expedite all the processing significantly and become much more efficient as well. Okay, so how to prepare? Well, once again, these are all things before you need them. Create a centralized process. Have a methodology for everything in place. Be ready. Find the automation tools we just talked about. Make sure you have those. Have them installed. Have them ready. If they can classify and index data, then do so. Have that done. Create a data map. Know where your data is stored. What is consumer data? What is not consumer data? Don't be wasting time processing data that you're not going to find anything about to consumers. And then train the necessary people. Make sure they are up to speed and are ready for anything that needs to be thrown upon them to be able to perform these requests so they can use the centralized process, the automation tools, leverage the classification and indexing, making sure they're being as efficient as possible. So one of the things I like to say about some of the different types of data where we see the consumer data stored, one of them is file shares, the other one's email. And quite honestly, both of them are abused as far as storage. I like to compare file shares to closets in your house. Nobody has an empty closet. Well, nobody has an empty file share either. So I like to call this shining a light on your dark data. Be able to go out there and know what's there in advance. You don't have to, once again, continue the processing. So I have a couple slides here of our Gimmal Discover product that does everything I was just talking about. And in this case, we're creating a thing called a policy. And the policy is going to go out and search federated processing through these three different data sources. You're going to notice those. EWS mailbox is actually an Exchange mailbox, SharePoint sites, and Windows file paths, which are your file shares. So in this scenario, with Gimmal Discover, it'll allow you to be able to say, I've already included everything about any of these that are in my environment. I already have them in Gimmal Discover. Now, when I run my policy, I want to process all of these. But what's going to happen in the background is we have an agent for each one of these running, and the agent is multi-threaded, and you can actually install multiple agents. So for instance, if we had 5 agent threads running at the same time for one agent, but we had 5 instances of the agent, we got 25 mailboxes processed at a time. Once again, do the math, and you're going to notice how much faster that's going to process going through everything. So it's really beneficial, once again, to do that multiple data source processing. The next one I want to show you is actually the last slide here is to be able to give you an idea of a report. So this is going through, it produced a report for Tom Jones. So Tom Jones made a request, also including his formal name of Thomas Jones. And he said, I want to know about all my data. And you're going to notice I have phone number and social security number here. So Tom provided personal identifiable information in his phone number and social security number. And what we did is went out and said, okay, if we just find Tom Jones, that is probably a large group of people. We need something else to personally identify Tom. Well, the social and the phone are going to do it for us. So what this is showing us is we found 5 emails with, here's the email address and the folder where we found it, the subject of the email, date, time, full name, Tom Jones. We also found in Betty Williams' mailbox a phone number. And here's the phone number, but notice it's masked. One of the things we do with Gimmal Discover is mask that data. We do not want to propagate PII any more than it already has been. So we are going to show you where we found it so you can find that message if you needed to, but we're not going to put it into the report. Same holds true for the social security number. We are going to mask that data. And then if you draw your attention to the last one, SharePoint site, and you're going to notice for Tom Jones, it's actually the same Word document here, but we did an exhaustive search. So we found his phone number, and we found his social, and we found his name. So we didn't just stop at once saying, we found a match, we're done. We want to go through and be able to provide all of the hits that were found by doing this process. So in summary, are you ready? Have you done all these? Do you have a product? Do you have a centralized process to do all this? Where's the data? Have you located it? Do you know where the consumer data is based? And what is your methodology for collecting, auditing, processing, and delivering to these requests? Nicole, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. We do have a poll question for you guys. Would you like more information about Gimmal Discover? And if you could go ahead and answer that. While you are answering that, we will go ahead and get started on the Q&A. It looks like we have a few questions in the question and answer section, but if you have any questions, be sure to put it in and we will hopefully get to it before the end of this webinar. So the first question I have for you is, have there been any CCPA fines made public?
Good question. I haven't seen any yet. I have seen GDPR fines, and they are significant, hundreds of thousands of pounds in GDPR. But there are active cases that I know about right now for Amazon, TikTok, Zoom, and there's others as well that are in the CCPA process. Awesome.
Thank you. Next question. Are GDPR and CCPA identical?
Identical, not really. There's similarities, but you can actually, I believe you can go out and Google and see the differences. But there are similarities, but there's also notable differences because one's in the European Union, obviously, and one's in the state of California. But they do have some similarities, yes.
How is masking different from reacting?
Yeah, we're not redacting the data. So we're not going out to the data source and redacting the information, which means that we obfuscate it. So for instance, if we found a social security number in a Word document, we would leave the Word document intact, but the redacting would actually, like taking a black magic marker over paper, that's the same kind of thing as redacting. The masking is we're not affecting the real data. We're simply in the report, not showing you the value. So we're not propagating the PII.
Okay, awesome. What data sources can Gimmal Discover process?
Oh, there's a bunch. Okay, so I'm going to top my head here. So let's see if I can get them all. Box, all flavors of Exchange for archives and mailboxes, so on-prem or cloud-based, either one. We can also do desktops. So if you're looking at people's hard drives, wondering what they have on there, as far as anything to do with the DSAR, we can do that. Also, Gmail, G Drive, OLEDB, which is an SQL-based, OneDrive, PSTs, there's two, Teams, which we just added, and Windows file shares. I think I got them all.
Awesome. Okay, going back to the previous question, can Gimmal Discover mask all CPIs, PHIs, and PIIs?
Good question. You actually can create routines. So we have a thing called a workflow builder inside of Gimmal Discover, and that's what allows you to perform the logic of what's being processed and how it's processed. Inside of that, you can create routines that do mask the values uniquely. So obviously we would mask a phone number different than we would a social security number, different than we would a passport number, and what have you. So yes, those can be all different.
Okay, cool. Good to know. And this will be the last question, unless one kind of sneaks in. How does Gimmal Discover classified data?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so that goes back to the classification thing I talked about. So you can go into Gimmal Discover in the classification module, and you can provide the keywords or the patterns, which is basically regex, and assign a label of your discretion to that data. And what we do is we update the alternate data stream of the file. So for instance, if we were doing it on a file share, we would actually apply the label directly to the file itself, and that's now part of the metadata or property of the file. It's not visible in the UI, so you couldn't go in the file manager and see that, but we can then use it to leverage when we do the DSAR request to know what data we're going after.
Awesome. Thank you. If anyone has any more questions, our contact information is right here on the screen. You can also email us at info@gimmal.com or visit our website at www.gimmal.com. For those interested in the recording of this webinar, we will be sending it out between 24 and 48 hours in the form of a thank you email. In next week's webinar, we will be partnering up with Carahsoft to discuss how to quickly respond to FOIA and open records requests. That webinar will be held on Tuesday, October 9th at 1 p.m. Central Time, so a little bit different than our typical webinars. And we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you, everyone.